It's a pleasant enough day, not too hot and not too cold. But rain or shine, the Westcliff Green is a favourite place for dog walkers, and whether we like it or not, the tranquillity is occasionally broken by the shouts of owners chasing their hapless charges. Let's go in and find a moment of peace with a nice cup of tea. Hello, I'm Peter John Cooper. I'm sure I've told you any number of times that a story like the one I'm going to tell you today is a journey that you and I, the writer and the listener, embark on together in the expectation of some satisfying outcome at the end. Something that teaches us about the world and what it is to be human. Sadly, I only have half of this story, and you are going to have to fill in the details for yourself in the way that I was unable to do. It's called Angus.
Angus! 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 Come here! Here! Why won't you come here?
You could hear her voice right across the green, even above the wind and the waves when the weather was rough.
Angus! Angus!
It was not an unusual sound, but it did make me cross, more than it usually would. Not at Angus. Poor mutt had obviously never been trained, but with the owner, who had so manifestly failed in their duty to the animal they professed to love. Creatures need order in their lives, otherwise they just get confused about what they're meant to be doing. Someone bellowing their name might just as well be saying, "Go and play," or "Go and chase the gulls," "Go and jump up at that little girl," as "Come here and be quiet." And the loved one is puzzled that they cannot thereby ever make their owner content. Was there a note of condescension, even disdain that rankled? Or was I missing a more caring, if not tender tone, however misguided in the shouts? And so it continued. Every day the woman, I shall call her Rosemary, because, like everyone else on the Westcliff, we never learnt her real name. Rosemary would come and sit on one of the benches and begin her chorus.
Angus, come here at once! Angus! Angus!
She was always accompanied by her husband, a tall, shambling figure with thinning sandy hair and thick, shaded glasses, who wore a distracted air like his aged sports jacket, with leather patches on the elbows. It never occurred to me to wonder where the ostensible Angus was. Hiding under the bushes, no doubt, sorting through the litter bins, probably. There were any number of places to scamper into and hide and play deaf. And there were dozens of similar mutts careering about, causing a nuisance, accompanied by similar vain shouts and imprecations. It was impossible to discern one from the other, and they all looked the same to me anyhow. But there was something that struck me as odd about Rosemary. She never carried the requisite tennis ball projector and bunch of small plastic bags that was the sign of the proud doggy owner. She did wear a gilet over a jumper and a mid-calf dress of hideous print, but Where was this creature who played such a large part in the soundscape of our day? Out of idle curiosity, no, more than that, out of that sort of fascination we all feel to the slightly annoying and bizarre, in the way you can't avoid a mouth ulcer, I took to observing more closely and watching Rosemary from when she first emerged onto the greensward every morning and took her usual place on one of the benches. There was the tall figure of the husband, seemingly already lost in the long grasses and bushes, and almost at once began the shouts.
Angus! 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 Come here! Here! Why won't you come here?
And then it clicked. Angus was not the dog, or any dog, not any sort of retriever or poodle or any of the rest of the four-footed nuisances that we contend with every day. Angus was the husband, the poor fellow who shambled along, apparently unaware or ignoring all this shouting and fulminating. And actually, there was something equally annoying about his behaviour, about his passivity. Why, I thought, doesn't he turn round and dot her one on the snoot? I'm pretty sure I would. And then maybe she would shut up for a bit. But after a while, Rosemary would rise, and with an
Angus! Angus! Come on!
she would descend the 127 concrete steps to the beach, with Angus shambling behind, and her voice still audible all the way down onto the promenade. You are now, of course, expecting a murder. Preferably one of a particularly gruesome kind, one in which one or other of them found themselves so near the end of their tether that they were obliged to take action. And you would be asking, which one would be the murderer and which one the murderee? After all, it might not be Angus who reaches the end of his boundless saintly patience, but the wife, driven to distraction by his obvious, unhelpful recalcitrance, what used to be called dumb insolence, and which today is referred to as passive aggression. Perhaps he may have spent years winding his wife up in this way by his unwillingness to fall into line with her simplest of wishes. However, as the months and years passed, homicide, justifiable or not, didn't seem to be occurring. They seemed to continue in exactly this vein, apparently without any prospect of ever coming to more amicable terms. Angus never argued, never shouted back. In fact, I don't think I ever heard him utter so much as a whimper. So, what is the truth of this rather odd relationship? What enabled it to continue? Why didn't either of them just up and leave? What was the secret of living in such an apparently one-sided way? Habit? Isn't it easier to go with what you've got used to? Lack of awareness? Just not having divined to what depths the relationship had sunk? Some sort of need? Well, here there must be a certain amount of speculation on my part. I am a writer after all, and it did require a bit of sorting out from later newspaper reports, although I have to confess my speculation was way off beam. and made me realise that we can't always tell people's inner thoughts and motivations from their outer behaviour. The thing is, everyone has an history, a backstory as we might say today, and however difficult it might be to divine what that story is from what we see before us in the here and now, it behoves us all to understand how someone has arrived at this point. It matters because what they are now is only one aspect of the journey they have taken to get this far. You might say, we are all a work in progress and need forgiveness, or at least understanding of the twists and turns that have brought us here. It would seem that Angus was someone of some note, or had been. He had been a well-respected naturalist in the David Attenborough vein, although he never quite reached the dizzying heights of television fame of that other broadcaster, but he was a senior lecturer at the university in the days when it was still a polytechnic, and had published a number of books illustrated with beautifully detailed, if rather unimaginative, photographs. Later reports always made a passing reference to his wife, the woman I had named Rosemary, who was originally his laboratory assistant and continued in that role after their marriage. And although she was never credited, it was thought that she was probably the driving force in the career. At the time when he was at the height of his brief fame, wives were seldom acknowledged. Whatever, she clearly shared his love for the natural world. They had travelled the globe together, she taking photographs, he writing in a beautiful flowing prose of their minute observations in the jungles and grasslands of South and Central America. There was no family to hinder their explorations. Was there something in that, a disappointment for one or other of them? But the work apparently made up for any loss. But how different from the wide-open, endless pampas of Argentina were the few square metres of the Westcliff Green. But even in those close confines, Rosemary could always find something, some tiny creature crawling in the dust and cigarette ash under the bench. An earwig with unusual shaped pincers, for instance.
Angus!
Something that
Angus,
would make
come
her
here!
excited enough to want to share it with her
Angus,
husband,
come on!
who could only lumber about in his ever-darkening world. Did his failing eyesight and hearing become a frustration for them both? Her frustration at a man changing from an energetic, brilliant, insightful academic into a shambling disappointment, unable to share her continuing delight in the world. Or his own frustration at this same darkening, and the wife who would have become more distant as the days went by. The more distant, the more he came to rely on her. Is this what the shouting was? A reaching out to try and maintain that togetherness that had once been there? Or was there something deeper, her disappointment that her own contribution had been overshadowed by his, and now was her time to make her mark, even though it came in such a dark, sharp, revengeful way? How had they stayed together for so long in such a sharp-tongued environment? Wouldn't one or other of them have cleared off years ago? Or was there some habit of relationship or mutual respect? What is love after all but a mutual animosity fused into a relationship? And here is the ending you may have expected. One morning, Angus was found lying at the foot of the steps, badly concussed. When the paramedics lifted his large frame, they found Rosemary lying beneath him. The yellow ambulance helicopter landed nearby and airlifted Angus from the beach to the Royal Bournemouth Hospital, where he died later. Rosemary was removed by land ambulance because there was no need for hurry. She was already dead. This, I suppose, must be the end of our speculative journey together. I'm afraid I have no further information on the story, but I guess your imagination is racing ahead, making up the whys and wherefores. Of course, you mustn't let my prejudices and fancies influence your feelings here. All we can hope for our couple is that whatever the causes, Angus and Rosemary were finally at peace. Well, thank you for listening to that tale from the cliff edge, and thank you, Holly Cooper, for providing the voice of Rosemary. What do you think makes for a successful relationship? Patience and humility, or a mutual dynamism? Mutual admiration, or mutual distrust? Anyway, thank you for joining me on this journey into human nature. And I'll see you again next week.